That's an excellent question to compose my nonsense to. So, why do we practice tantric techniques and not simply sit in non meditation? Or, like you said, practice Mahamudra or Dzogchen? Because we can't. So, there are always, I've read in number of manuals by masters, various ones, Vajrayana masters, who mention that there might be people who are able to practice non-meditation. So, okay, so let me first clarify Mahamudra and Dzogchen, meaning of those two. Mahamudra, which means Mahamudra is Sanskrit, but I don't remember what it is in Tibetan. Tibetans call it with some other name, I don't remember what it is. So Mahamudra are the essence teachings of the Mahamudra tradition, Kagyu tradition. Dzogchen is same teaching, points to the same experience, but it is the Dzogchen or Mahasandhi, great perfection, is the teaching of the Nyingma tradition. So we have two different traditions now known in Tibetan Buddhism. Both started in ancient times, long before Dharma in Tibet, or the what we now consider as Tibetan Buddhism. And actually, Dzogchen teaching was in the beginning separate from Buddhism. So this is also an interesting point, and I'm not the guy to lecture about it because I don't remember that stuff. It's not that important. But then Dzogchen teaching has become part of Tibetan Buddhism. So that's where we are. Well, I don't have any formal connection with any Lama or tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. My contacts come from previous lives. I have some contacts from this life, but with all respect, I have wanted to keep my distance. So, so why are we practicing tantric practices such as mantras, visualizations, breathing practices, and so on, and not simply practicing this most simple, straightforward, basic yoga, which is known as Ati Yoga, which means like primordial yoga, or what I often like to use the term non-meditation. Non-meditation is a technical term coming from Mahamudra tradition, but like I said, both in Dzogchen and Mahamudra, they point to the same essence that we all have. So these are just technical terms coming from two different traditions. So why? Well, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? But it might, and there are many people to whom it is not obvious, for the reason that people confuse very easily Buddha nature, immensely clear, immensely soft, very sweet, very rich, completely grounded. People don't know the difference if there are some dirty or stuffy energies mixed. So this is actually an important point. Yesterday I was speaking about the two-part formula and how from the beginning we learn to in the beginning you can start getting things right from the beginning, but you don't really understand and you can't really understand what the basic nature is, because it gets so fine and so kind of so much details. But there is a lot of emphasis in our method and traditionally in Mahamudra and Dzogchen teachings to separating purity and impurity, separating pure nature and impure nature. This is absolutely essential. And there are so many people out there, some of them I know, quite famous teachers, who don't know the difference between the two. A really basic, a common example of this is mistaking thoughtlessness for the basic state or Buddha nature. This is something that I mentioned yesterday when I was speaking about emptiness and vipassana. But it is very, very important to know the difference between the two and understand why we have the difference, why there is the pure aspect and why there is the impure aspect. Both are in us, right? So we need to be realistic about what we are doing. Or my history and my experience in Zen Buddhism, and I don't mean to point fingers to anybody, but mistakes are mistakes. And when there are foundational mistakes in practice, how could it possibly lead to Buddhahood in this life? How could it possibly work? And I've seen it, well, I think I could say that with all respect that there aren't that many traditions or practice communities, lineages where it is known the difference between pure and impure, so that they could successfully recognize the pure and practice non-meditation or Ati Yoga. So my observation is that the vast majority of all kinds of meditators, Buddhist or otherwise, are stuck usually in the so-called substrate consciousness, which is like a formless layers of subconscious mind. So the layers that are beneath thought and emotion and images. So thought and emotion and images are just objects flying in the three-dimensional mental space, but underlying all that is kind of like this sediment, this thoughtless state, but it is not clear. So that's substrate consciousness. Dzogchen and Mahamudra masters always say this in manuals, that know the difference between the two, because if you don't, you're screwed and your practice won't work. And that's exactly how it is. And substrate consciousness, in Amrita Mandala side of things, substrate consciousness is the terrain from 7th Bhumi to 10th. This is actually like a universal Mahayana point. It's not actually only in Amrita Mandala, but it comes from classical Mahayana texts. Avatamsaka Sutra is the main one, with chapter 23, 24 or 26, 20 something. It speaks about 10 bhumis. But there are many other scriptures. But my point is that that thoughtless state, that is not basic state, there is gradation there. it gets finer and finer and finer. I remember in 2011, when I was living on my own, had just gotten divorced the first time, and I was practicing quite a lot by myself. And one afternoon I was sitting, meditating, and I was just sitting there in the best of my knowledge, best of my ability. And then one of my heart gurus, Tirumular, who is from Shaiva Tantra, Southern Shaiva tradition, one of the founding fathers of it, showed up, and I immediately felt Tirumular's charge. So he showed up, and he was kind of like this there for a moment, just looking at me, and I was, yes. And then he pointed out that, do you notice that? Like, he pointed out this substrate consciousness of mine, this thoughtless energetic mass that I was completely unaware before. Like, until that point I had only worked with thoughts, emotions, mental images, that stuff. And I didn't have experience, felt sensation about this thoughtless mass. But he was very kind to show up and point out, hey, there is this thoughtless mass here that you are not addressing at all. You're not aware of it at all. So, thanks to Gurudev Tirumular, he pointed it out, and then he was also the one who taught me the 13 Bhumi model, by the way, which is interesting. I'm making a little sidetrack from the Dzogchen and Mahamudra question, but it's very interesting because again, now we have understanding of the world of Dharma based on the present situation and recent history of Dharmic traditions, namely Hinduism and Buddhism. So when we speak of Bhumis, first of all, there is no single established Buddhist lineage that uses Bhumis. They do not know what they are about. There are some exceptions. For example, Garchen Rinpoche has very clearly spoken of Bhumis. His quote can be found from Buddhas Among Us book. But I've spoken about this with two Tibetan Buddhist lamas who are both scholars, and they said instantly that no, there is no single lineage that would use the 13 Bhumis or 10 Bhumis as a path map like we do. So people don't really know what they are, even though classical texts have extremely long texts about these things. But to begin with, Buddhists got the concept Bhumi and probably the experience of Bhumis from the Hindus. So Rig Veda, which is the oldest of the Hindu Vedas, Vedic scriptures, is roughly 12,000 years old. That's when it was written down. So it speaks about Bhumis. One interesting thing, kind of the connection, Tirumular was the one who taught it to me first, and then Guru Rinpoche expanded on that. But one historical, very interesting thing is that I've thought about it the last few days, is that the biggest Mahayana Buddhist temple in the world is Borobudur in Indonesia. Borobudur. And in Borobudur temple there is a large carving, wall carving of solid rock of Agastya. Did they just accidentally carve Agastya in a Mahayana Buddhist temple? I don't think so. So it's a fascinating point, isn't it? And if we look at the early lineage or the succession in lineage of Agastya and how it got to Tirumular, was a disciple of Nandi, and Nandi was a disciple of Agastya. So Tirumular is the second generation after Agastya. Agastya is he's the king of all dharmic traditions actually. He was the first of everything. Oh, it touches my heart, almost. but so my point is that considering that I don't know if Agastya's carvings are in other ancient Buddhist or Mahayana Buddhist temples, probably, but I haven't gone to these places. I'm not much of a pilgrimager, so I haven't looked into this, but I've just the little information alone of knowing that there's a large carving of Agastya in Borobudur it's pretty it's a clear indicator that early Mahayana Buddhists included Agastya. They wouldn't carve just random figures in those holy places. So yes, maybe I was getting to the question is still about your question about why Tantra and why not just sitting in non-meditation. Well, the 13 bhumis are really a key to that, or one kind of key to understanding it, because we have the 10 karmic, self-based vibratory areas or vibratory fields, and then we have the 3 bhumis, 11, 12 and 13, that are apart from it, or well, it's fine to say apart from it, although the whole practice is to do like a Mahasiddha bhumification on the first 10 bhumis, because you purify the 10 bhumis, so you actually transform or return them to their original condition, which is the same as 11, 12 and 13 always. So Mahasiddha bhumification. Yeah, but with the help of studying the samsaric vibe in ourselves, in others, doing bhumi analysis, energetic analysis, it's a good way of studying this question. Why Tantra? Why not just directly? But the main point is that there is no end to getting entangled with samsaric veils if we are not very exact about separating. I have seen so many people practice just sitting, shikantaza, which is supposed to be Buddha nature sitting, and they are sitting in this really thick, drowsy, sleepy mud. Oh, I have stories about people who I've known and people who I practiced with who died after practicing like that for long periods of time, full time, and then after dying, immediately in trouble with the so-called pardos, being blown recklessly by karmic winds, ending up taking rebirth in places that, well, probably they were not planning or expecting, and probably not hoping. So these are very, very serious matters. It doesn't matter, like if we look at Padmasambhava, or if we look at somebody, some great master from history like him, or some very recent ones like Chatral Rinpoche, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, Dujam Lingpa, so many. The names from Nyingma tradition come to my mind first because that's the tradition those are the masters I'm most familiar with, and they are close to my heart. But they spent a lot of time in retreat and practice. Why? Because they knew the difference of samsara and nirvana, pure and impure. So, of course, it is very fascinating when especially to Western audience, because Western audience wants to, I was just listening to two American Zen teachers discuss the difficulty with Western students. I think that both of them stopped teaching because of this. But problem with Western people is that we have this very highly individual sense, which is not a problem in itself, but it kind of gives birth to a number of basic problems. And one of those basic problems is that we find it very difficult to just really surrender and let go of our opinions and what we want and what we don't want. And especially if there is something we do not like. So I think that there's a bit of a disease in the world of Western Dharma with the point that there are teachers from certain lineages, saying that, there is this true self, this pure nature of ours, and you don't really need to practice it, you don't need to do anything, you don't need to have any experiences, you don't need awakenings. And then there are loads of teachers who kind of make their own mixes from these points. And it misleads lots of people. If I would recommend people who have been in those circles to go and meet some Lama who is regarded as a real Dharma master. Go and spend a couple of hours in such master's presence and see how those delusions and opinionatedness crumbles like dry clay, because it will in the presence of a master. But if you just hang around with somebody who isn't that highly awakened, maybe has 1, 2, 3 bumi openings, and then started teaching missions, which is extremely common in the world. It is better than nothing, but this is something that I often talk about, these standards. It doesn't seem like there are no standards at all in this wider world of Dharma and yoga and spirituality and non-duality and Advaita and so on. It doesn't seem that there are any standards, and that's why there are so many people teaching huge masses, thousands and thousands of people, faulty teachings, faulty view, faulty practice, no result. So it is very, very, very serious matter. Yeah. But let's think about this question a little bit from the perspective of Amrita Mandala, because we have dynamic practices. We have, well, dynamic practice is the main one. When it is supported by refuge and bodhicitta, then you can very easily separate pure and impure and get to enjoy the tastiest of meals. It gives you access to experience this wonderful sweetness and purity of your own nature. Because you punch through your energy system, your subtle bodies, you create a hole. And through that hole, completely fresh mountain air. So this is actually very, very unique in the world. I spoke with Lama John Hogue, who has been a practitioner for 50 years and has been around a lot and was very close to Chatral Rinpoche, Dudjom Rinpoche, the first Dudjom Rinpoche. And Lama John, he suspects that they used to do dynamic concentration in Dzogchen tradition like we do it. Not only shouting it few times, but few hundred times in a session. He suspects that this is how it was in Dzogchen tradition, that people used to practice like that, but they don't anymore. They just shout few times. Like if you go to a Dzogchen teachings and they teach Semjins, Semjin means it literally means, what's the Tibetan word? I've forgotten the Tibetan terms, but Semjin technique is like a really simple and short technique that can be quickly applied. And shout is one of those. It takes a second to shout. Or, briefly visualizing something. This is Semjin. So if you go and take a course in Dzogchen teachings where they teach Semjins, what I have seen with number of different teachers, they shout 3-4 times and that's it. But if we know to observe our subtle bodies, it is probably not enough. And this is the reason why when we start punching, we keep punching with mantras. 100 times, 200, 300. Just last week I was shouting 400-500 a day in a session. So it is very precious. Yeah. So it is possible to, directly create access to this totally pure Buddha nature from the start, but your practices and your view need to be spot on. Yeah. Okay, is that enough? Matteo, did I answer?
Yeah, thank you. It makes sense. When I was studying Dzogchen initially 7-8 years ago, I looked around. I didn't get it, first of all, and I looked around the others, and I was like, are people getting this? Because it just didn't make sense to me why they were teaching it. Because it seemed, and it's only as my own uh, clarity of Buddha nature has deepened, then I was like, oh, this is what they were trying to point to back then. But it just always seemed so difficult for me. How will I or others get it? Just getting that from the start.
Yeah, yeah. And that's actually one thing. Well, the whole established Dharma scene is kind of its own thing. And I have absolutely, I've always looked at things purely from the perspective of pragmatism. Pragmatism. So what works, what is practical, that's all that ever mattered to me. And like I have said so many times that if I learned about a method that is more effective than Amrita Mandala, I would immediately go to that method. So to me, it's like a no-brainer. What the heck, if you can make things more effective, this is how we do in everything, isn't it? In science, in arts, in so I think bettering of things is, and what do you call that, like updating things is, we need to do this in all fields, including this field in Dharma. But yeah, one silly feature of, well, it's not kind of silly, but to if we look at great lamas, Chatral Rinpoche, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. I think Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, if I remember correctly, he did the Nandro, the preliminary practices, 17 times. That's like 1.7 million prostrations, 1.7 million Vajrasattva mantras, mandala offerings, and what's the fourth one? I don't remember. It's a huge amount of practice. Okay, that dynamic aspect isn't present in the teachings that Dilgo Khyentse practiced like it is in Amrita Mandala, and it's a big difference. But again, the point is that he did lots of lifting, lots of purification. All these greats have. So then again, if I look at Western folks who might not be interested in the basic stuff, in the preliminaries, and in saying mantras and doing practices and going to retreats, they want to go straight to the highest teachings, straight to Dzogchen, and it's again quite problematic attitude issue. And having said that, it's possible to glimpse, but then it sets certain requirements for 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 the whole setup. There was something else you said which reminded me of something, but it slipped already.
I just remembered from, I can't remember how exactly it was phrased, but in Dilgo Khyentse's biography, or one of them, it is said that his children didn't know that he was their father until they were like several years into their lives. They thought he was this funny uncle who came from retreat once in a while. So that's one aspect of having to do it that way.
Yeah. Funny uncle. Yeah. But what is an immense blessing is to make sense of things. Make sense of things. That, learn things in understandable and applicable way. It is immense blessing. It is not something that lineage holders, teachers, it is something that lineage holders and teachers should take very seriously. And I think it's a responsibility of our teachers that we try to better our ways of teaching and explaining, because that's our main job. And one of the responsibilities of a teacher, whether sutric or tantric, is to make sure that when there are people listening, is to make sure to check that students actually understand what is taught or what is pointed at. If it doesn't matter, if I'm just talking stuff here in front of you and I'm not concerned about whether my pedagogics are sound, if it makes sense, if the dots connect or not, and if I'm not interested whether you get it or not, then I'm a lousy teacher. Very, very poor teacher. And this doesn't happen, like I've said so many times over the years, this doesn't happen in secular education. Our kids learn to read and write and do math and geography and stuff at school. So the teachers are not fucking around. They're talking nonsense from one day and 1 month to the other. They are actually, the kids need to learn. But on the Dharma side of things, from the teaching perspective and pedagogics, it is bad. It is very bad. And I wish I could say, yes, it is these things in so many Dharma centers and communities, they practice so well. I mean, for fuck's sake, there are 100 people on some retreat or 500 people on some retreat, and it's bloody mind-blowing because they are recognizing themselves as Buddhas from the first minute of the retreat. It would be amazing to say that, but it is not the case. Well, we can only hope that not all teachings are suitable for everybody in the first place, and I'm still kind of figuring it out myself, how the whole dharmic path in the grand scale, how does it actually work. But it is also true that when we are exposed to and we practice some teachings that don't work so well, and you might be sitting in that substrate consciousness mud for years and years and years, it creates a habit, it creates a karmic connection. Knowing what we know, that there is the purity of Buddha nature and there is the impurity of samsaric nature. Do we really want to have kind of like a dirty dharmic connections with practices and traditions that do not give us the pure nature of ours. Do we want that? Not all meditations, not even in Buddhism, not all meditations are recognizing our pure, inherent, fantastically fresh and loving nature. Yeah, not all meditations are the same. Yeah. I don't know if I should be okay with it or if it's okay. It is how it is. I guess I'm still kind of figuring out how to be okay with it. Any other comments about this?
I'd like to add something if I may.
Go ahead, Mike. Yeah, good to see you.
So, yeah, thank you. Likewise. So back in May on a layover to Finland, I visited a Nyingma school temple in New York City. It wasn't one of the main lineages. It was, I don't remember the name of it, but it was a Turton from like the 1500s. And there was like a wonderful charge from Guru Rinpoche. As soon as I walked in the door, they were in the middle of practice at the time, but they were fine with letting people just sit in. And there was like a 2 meter tall statue of Guru Rinpoche that I have some pictures of. They were all chanting in Tibetan stuff. It was quite traditional. And then they invited me for the dinner they had afterwards. And I don't know if he was officially a lama, but certainly the guy that was like the main teacher there at the time struck up a conversation with me at dinner, and I told him a little bit about Amrita Mandala, showed him my Namo Guru Rinpoche wristband, and just before he left, I mentioned dynamic concentration to him and how we do long sets of it, and he said, "Oh, we do that too." But I mean, I tried to read some boomies, and I've read him at 2 open, and I don't think anybody else was awake in the room. So even if I have no idea where their dynamic concentration is in their curriculum. But if they're doing it, they must not be doing it quite right. Otherwise, I think you'd see a lot more boomies open than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, Lama John told me, who, he's very close was with Chaton Rinpoche and Duchom Rinpoche. He was Duchom Rinpoche's translator for many years. And he's very close with Khandro Kamala Rinpoche, who's Chaton Rinpoche's Khandro, wife, companion.
Mm.
And Lama John told me that this is not done in Nyingma, but it is a legitimate practice. Legit practice. Yeah. Well, many blessings to all practitioners everywhere. May Guru Rinpoche and Shakyamuni Buddha and all the greats shower their blessings, give them insights, support them, help them, and protect them in this life and all future lives. There.
I found